Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to another episode of Family Business Friday, our October 2nd edition. Very, very honored to have one of our advisory board members and an outstanding person, Denny Klein, President and CEO of Rand, Feuer Klein. Denny, welcome.
Thank you.
The,
Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, well, happy to have you. And so, as always, I want to go through some slides. We have some new people here who may not know what the Rothman Institute is, so I do that, and then I've added a few slides. And then we'll get right into the meat of your discussion. So our mission statement at Fairleigh Dickinson University, the Rothman Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, is to support, promote, and research entrepreneurship with a special focus on family and veteran businesses. We wouldn't exist without our wonderful sponsors, the TD Bank Charitable Foundation, Provident Bank, Sun Trust, CIA&J. Tony Russo, the president of CIA&J, was on last week, and we had a great discussion about politics and small business and family business. The programs that we're known for, we have a student entrepreneurship programs we've been doing for 30 years, where we really encourage student entrepreneurs, trying to do more and more of that. We have our Family Business Alliance, where we work with family businesses and provide everything from consulting to educational sessions. I had a coaching session with some of the family businesses. So we really try to do everything that we can to support family businesses where they are and how they need support. We have our Family Business Awards we've done for 27 years. I'm gonna say a little bit about it. We have our 28th awards coming up. They will be virtual on October 21st. You will all be invited. With no charge, and I think it'll be a wonderful, I think you'll find it to be a wonderful program. We have our Veterans Launching Ventures program we've done for 10 years, say about that, and our Small Business Series for 5 years, where we provide insights for small businesses. As some of you have heard before, we founded Family Business Week, which is the 4th weekend this month, October, every year. We want people to support family businesses throughout the year, but we want them to pay particular attention to identify and support family businesses in the 4th week in October, which happens at the same time as our Family Business Awards. Our website, familybusinessweek.com, and we started Shop Family NJ for people that may want to buy gift cards for restaurants and other places that have been really hurt by the pandemic. One of the things we have is a TV show called Family Business World. And I host that TV show. It's every Thursday at 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. at RVN TV. We've had some amazing guests, and the whole idea is to really highlight the wonderful things that family businesses are doing in the community for employees, for customers. And really, my research is really showing that the best place to work, better than big business, better than government, even better than nonprofits, are family businesses. Because once you're in a family business, you're treated like a family member. And so some of the things that businesses have done above and beyond others have been extraordinary. We also have our Family Business Fridays, which you're all attending now. And we will continue them throughout the year, except for holidays. Our Veterans Launching Ventures program is now national. I think we have 7 different states represented, where we help veterans and their family members identify, develop a business plan around their entrepreneurial endeavors. And so Veteran Business World is our website. Next, we have if you go to YouTube, our YouTube channel, the Rothman Institute of Entrepreneurship. We have about 7,000 subscribers. This video will be on that website. So if you want to share that with others and say, Denny Klein was fantastic, you need to hear this. It will be posted on this channel. And really the highlight and what the team of Sullivan, Moore, Paniski, and I are working on is our 28th Annual Family Business Award, October 21st at 12 noon. You know, it will be a link, it will be a virtual discussion, and the awards will be live, and we will have a live open discussion with 2 of our most popular guests. One is Tim Sullivan, the CEO of New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Tim is a friend of the Institute and a friend of small business. And this is going to be not just a presentation, but an interactive session. And we have our other very popular guest, Al Titon, the District Director of the U.S. Small Business Administration. This is a can't miss event, October 21st at 12 noon. So I hope you can be there. And again, I've been a member of the New Jersey Restart and Recovery Advisory Council, where we really are advising the governor on how we can get small businesses up and running. The small business crisis, we're going to talk a lot with Denny about some of the insurance ways to protect yourself. As always, I show this chart to show that the unemployment that we thought was so horrible in 2010 pales in comparison to what's going on now, and it's really happening because of small businesses. And so you can see that we reached, unfortunately, record levels of unemployment, largely because of the small business, the pandemic stopping small businesses. Fortunately, the unemployment has gone down a little bit, but it's still a national crisis. And so this slide, which gets the most response, is to show that most of America, 70% are really small. Most of the businesses are small businesses and medium-sized businesses, and large businesses represent a small part. And so this is a big slide that I have not shown before, but one of the areas of research and the things that we're doing is what I call inclusive entrepreneurship. Is that when you look at entrepreneurship and you look at minority entrepreneurship and minority-owned firms, I really want you to see that the growth of minority firms has been great. But the slide that's really important, and this is for all policymakers, we're in the midst of a major political election, and every party needs to understand that when there's parity, and what they mean by parity is that when small businesses our entrepreneurial endeavors represent the relative population, then some wonderful things happen for the economy. The number of firms in millions goes up to 9.9 million, but the paid employment goes from 7.2 million to 20.4 million if there's parity among women, veteran, minority businesses. And the gross receipts go up to $4.3 trillion if we do that. So things like the entrepreneur zones and things like inclusive entrepreneurship are actually good business issues that I hope both parties will understand, that it's critical that you really support minority businesses to turn around communities and grow the economy. And so finally, with that, we talked last week about the governor's budget. Unfortunately, it didn't talk that much about small and family businesses, and Tony Russo and myself or others are really trying to push them to say that you've got to focus. You look at this, the taxes in the state, and it's spread across people like you who run small and small businesses. So with that, I want to turn it over to Denny Klein, who has become a good friend, who is an expert at not only at insurance, but the issues of small business. And he has a technical expertise, but we're going to ask Denny to really talk about his experience. So Denny, welcome. I don't know if you have some opening remarks. I have a whole bunch of questions for you. Uh-oh, you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Dale, for inviting me this morning, and I really appreciate it. Also, I believe today, I'm not sure of all the people that are here, but one of them is my son, Joey Klein, who has just graduated from Fairleigh Dickinson University, Sullivan School of Business, who was an entrepreneur major, and he's now come into our business full-time as the fourth generation. So we're just thrilled to have him, and I'm thrilled that he's attending today. I know our presentation today is insurance and risk management in the age of COVID, but let me start off by first saying I want to offer my prayers and our collective prayers to all of those who are the victims of COVID and their families. We send our prayers to them and hope that we can get over this terrible pandemic. That being said, in the meantime, we got to deal with the present and what's going on and where we are. And many of you realize that we're not over this crisis yet. We still got a ways to go, and it's going to affect everywhere in our lives. And also, I hope you're all keeping safe and staying safe. Mm-hmm. That being said, once in a while, I may have to look down to refer to my notes, so I hope you don't mind.
Of course. No.
The first thing I want to talk about, the environment of insurance and risk management, is risk management. The risk management is a science of which insurance is a tool. And that's something that I've been practicing for a number of years, having been the risk management consultant for the New Jersey Turnpike and Highway Authority for 9 years, and gaining a tremendous amount of experience there, as well as also being the insurance and risk management chairman for the Metro West Jewish community for the last, 12, 14 years. So risk management is the environment of which we conduct our business. So let me talk a little bit about risk management. Risk management basically begins with the idea of understanding exposures. So that's exposure analysis. We need to understand what can go wrong. You know, things that come to mind immediately are fires, floods, you know, hurricanes, theft, both external and internal. There's all different kinds of hazards that affect a business. And our first job is to work with our client to understand what their exposures to loss are. Once we've gone through that phase, the next phase is to determine various ways of handling those exposures. And many are insurance related, of course, but many are not. For example, hold harmless agreements, exculpatory language in contracts, which allow someone to escape, which is the word exculpation, from potential liability. There's all kinds of elements there that need to be looked at. So we look at various alternatives, both insurance and non-insurance, and apply those techniques with our client. And that's part of this phase, which is to come to an understanding of what the plan is going to be. Once we've implemented the plans with our clients, then we obviously have to make sure we're constantly reviewing those plans. So in risk management, there's various things that you can do. And the most important thing is not to have unconscious retention of exposures. You want to work with your insurance and risk management professional to understand what exposures to loss you can have. Some of these are obvious, but some of them are not so obvious. So when you work with your professionals, they will help you to make these decisions. But the most important thing is that you know what exposures you have, and then you can make conscious decisions about them as opposed to taking on risk unconsciously, which
Denny,
is our first concern. Go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, let me ask you there, because again, I want to, many of our folks are entrepreneurs who are just, they really don't think about risk. They like taking risks. They like doing, and they're smart risks and there are other risks. So they're risk averse. And so, I mean, they're not risk averse. And so how do you, and I'm sure you run across this, how do you help that entrepreneur that says, it's not going to, odds aren't going to happen. And with that, I want to say Tony Russo is in our panel. And so Tony, I'm sure eventually we'll have some questions from CIA&J around that Pilks have asked about insurance. But Denny, what do you say? And I'm sure you've run across them, to someone who is, it's not going to happen. Why should I pay money for something that's not going to happen?
Well, first of all, that's an excellent question you're raising, because there's different types of risk. We're talking about pure risks that businesses have. The idea is by using proper risk management techniques and by using insurance correctly, you can take on more risk, particularly in terms of entrepreneurial type risk, which is different than the kind of risk I'm talking about in risk management. And of course, in banks and financial institutions, they also have a concept of risk management. Even in insurance carriers, that has to do with financial capacities and various other things. Right. What we're talking about is the kind of exposures that can happen to people that are not good. My point being, and this is, as I said, your question is very apropos, because when you control your exposures, when you take proper care of them, that gives you the opportunity to take more business risk and be able to go out there knowing basically that you're covering your behind. So let me give you my quick elevator pitch, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Shit happens. And sometimes it happens to you. And that's where we come in, because we're here when you're having your problems to make sure that not only have you prepared yourself for them, but at the time of loss, that's when we come in. We or any other good agent or risk manager is coming there to help you. So I wanted to talk about some of the elements that are related to the idea of risk management. And one of them we talked about is trying to transfer exposures. And we talked about transfers that can be done outside of insurance such as on your lease. There's all types of transfer language and exculpatory language and any number of legal documents. And the idea is to transfer risk away from you and not to take on risk if you can help it. Now, that being said, in order to be able to do all the other types of risks that we're talking about, entrepreneurial risk, you have to be able to take on your exposures and handle them. So one of the best ways of transferring your exposures is by buying an insurance product. An insurance product has a lot of very good features to it. One, you are buying coverage at the time of loss. You're also getting loss control services and claims management services from your insurance carrier and your agent broker. So there's a lot of very good stuff in an insurance policy. Yes, it's true, not everything is covered. There are exclusions in all policies. And one of the exclusions, obviously, we're going to talk about in a minute, is the virus exclusion and coming COVID exclusions that are in many policies today.
Right.
By the way, let me just stop one moment and say that if anybody has any questions, wants to chat, please, feel free, because I want this to be as much of a dialogue. I know we're on a webinar, but I'd love to have your input.
Yeah.
Another method of handling
just
exposure.
tell me, use the chat box, but make sure to use the chat box. Some people have asked about, can we ask questions? But yeah, please.
Yeah. So another way of handling exposures to loss besides transfer is controlling them. And that means things like, well, let's talk about basic loss control when you drive your car. You keep your eyes open, you look both ways before turning, you use your turn signals, you do all that kind of stuff to make sure that you're in control of your car and and you can control your exposure. The reason I'm using this very simple method as a way of showing an example is because we constantly are using risk management every day in our lives. Going back to the time we were in caves, somebody had to stand outside the cave with a spear in case the saber-toothed tiger attacked, so the other people could get sleep. Well, that's a form of risk management. That's a form of control. So one of the other things is to avoid risk. That's a very hard thing to do, as you know, because when you're in an entrepreneurial or business environment, the idea is to take risks, take business risk that you can try to further your goals and your company's endeavors. So it's very hard to avoid risk. But again, going back to the driving idea, when you drive, you see an accident coming, well, you swerve to avoid it. So that's a good thing. So we have transfer, we have control, and we have avoidance. Those are three major elements. Those are all combined. When we buy an insurance product, we get a lot of those things. But there are other things as well. Yeah. So as I mentioned before,
Denny,
Dale.
Let me start, because I think, so there's some interest in, okay, let's talk about some specifics. And so as you think about, hindsight is 2020. So businesses going into the pandemic, obviously they didn't know things were going to happen in March, they were going to be closed down. Is there anything that businesses could have done that most didn't from a risk management standpoint? What are some of your specific, because I want to give them some real concrete things. What would you say that people should think about doing or should have thought about doing?
Well, let's face it. This was something that none of us saw coming.
Right.
There were insurance carriers that years ago were offering pandemic insurance to major hotel chains, things like that. This is not something that most of us would be able to purchase.
Right.
The fact is that most companies did not buy this coverage because it was too expensive. And now we know why it was so expensive, because first of all, the insurance carriers couldn't price it.
Right.
There's various risk management techniques that I want to talk about in relationship to this, particularly not much we can do about what's already happened, but it's a question of what we're going to do now. And that's particularly bringing employees back to work as we slowly open the economy. Different states have done different attempts to do this. Some of them perhaps less wisely than others. I think we've been very careful in the state of New Jersey, but sooner or later we need to bring employees back. So of course, now we're talking about making sure that we're working with our landlords or our cleaning services to make sure that we're cleaning our places properly, that we properly instructed our employees on the protocols necessary to avoid problems with COVID. Obviously, wearing protective face coverings and various things like that, and social distancing. The more science that we see on this, the more we realize that wearing masks and social distancing are extremely important.
Right.
So we're going to have to do that in the workplace. Also, one of the concerns that we have, particularly right now, is in various colleges and schools. What do we do about that? Well, some schools have used avoidance. They're not having school. And many of you know what's going on in that regard. Some schools that brought their students back, now they're having to go through additional efforts because they're finding that people, they couldn't stop people from social distancing. They got together, they had parties. We're seeing the effects of this right now. But the fact is that we have to be very careful about the way we open up our businesses.
Right.
Not everybody needs to come back right away. People can come back in a staggered fashion. That's another thing that we're doing. Some businesses absolutely require to have people on site. Obviously, anything related to entertainment, restaurants, hotels, airlines, all these things, obviously you can't avoid. If you're going to, go to a restaurant, you got to know that that place is going to be safe. And we thankfully have very strict guidelines in the state of New Jersey.
But Denny, are there insurance products? So people are going to want to. Okay, so I'm a restaurant owner. I'm bringing stuff back. We're opening up 25%. What insurance products should I think about to really protect myself?
Well, that's an interesting question because in many cases there are no products to protect you, insurance products. Let's get into COVID a little bit. Right now, many of you are aware that we have a virus exclusion on most property policies in this country. And the fact is that some of the courts have penetrated that. They're beginning to try to overcome some of those virus exclusions and force insurance companies paying claims for business interruption, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we need business interruption insurance. We need liability insurance. We need property insurance in general. These are products that any business is going to have in order to be able to operate. Unfortunately, because of this virus exclusion, most of these claims are not going to be covered. The insurance companies did not collect premiums for this. They had no contemplation of this exposure. Even though there was order of civil authority, which is a technical term in insurance, meaning that the government required that, I'm sorry, hold on, I got to close my door.
No, it's okay. That's okay. So one of the things that, as Denny steps away, is risk is never been higher. Now, as people go back, we don't know if there's going to be a resurgence of COVID, and we really want to know, what do these businesses have to do? I know I see a number. We have a bus company online, we have bankers, we have retailers. What advice, and that was great advice about how they can kind of manage things, but how can they, as they talk to their insurance carrier, what should they be asking them about?
Well, let me go on and finish my thought here, because what's happening is, because of the legal environment related to COVID, where there is efforts on the part of lawyers and courts to overturn the exclusion, and there's even discussion amongst various legislative bodies to create a legislative solution. What's happening right now is many insurance carriers are renewing their policies with specific COVID exclusions. We had a similar problem many years ago in relationship to environmental exposures. And in the famous case in New Jersey was the Jackson Township case. The bottom line is we ended up with an absolute pollution exclusion because the insurance industry was going to shut down otherwise. And I want to make an important point here, Dale. COVID is an exposure that businesses have today, but it is not necessarily the only exposure or the major exposure. Right. You still have all the exposures that you had before in relationship to liability, losses, negligence, fires, thefts, all the things that can happen to a business. Those things are still going on. The fact is we have COVID in this country, but people are still getting sick for other reasons. So COVID isn't the only issue. I think we have to understand the limitations in relationship to COVID we have as business owners and then work around it. And one of the important things about that is having a conscious understanding of the exposure of COVID. So there are things that are being done. There are people that are developing certification processes for businesses, hotels, restaurants, airlines, where they can demonstrate that they're using proper cleaning techniques and get certifications in relationship to this so that the public will feel safer doing business with them. And that's an important element that can be done. But let's not forget that in the world of insurance and risk management goes on with COVID and without it. Eventually, we're going to get over this. Eventually, we're going to develop a proper vaccine and we're going to get back to work. So the fact is, when you bring your employees back to work, that's where you want to be careful. You want to work with your employment practice attorneys. You want to use best practices in bringing your employees back to work. Because here's the problem. Right now, there is coverage for liability on many policies, even though there's a virus exclusion on property policy.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening because of the reactions to the courts and everything else, the insurance carriers are now putting pandemic exclusions across the board. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're going to find a lot of relief. Eventually, it's possible with these certification processes that I talked about a few minutes ago, there will be the ability perhaps to get pandemic coverage, but I wouldn't count on that too soon. And we are here mostly with smaller businesses, Dale, and that's not going to be a product that most people can afford, at least not in the near future. Right. Who knows down the road? Many policies and coverages that we have now that we don't even think twice about years ago were impossible to get. Mm-hmm. So, for example, employment practice liability, environmental liability, these are things that have come up in the world that we live in that nobody contemplated many years ago, particularly employment practice liability. But in regards to employment practice liability, even if you do have COVID or non-COVID exclusions, you certainly want to consider having those types of coverage, because in the event that you have a problem with unlawful, what is deemed to be a potential unlawful hiring or firing, discrimination, you want to make sure that you've got coverage for that. Because as I said, there's many areas where it's not about COVID, it's about everything else. I'm going to take a look here and see what this chat question is. This is a great insight. Thank you. One of the biggest scheduling issues is ensuring employment opportunities for employees who are home doing virtual school with their children and not able to perform regularly assigned duties until their children's schools reopen. Well, that is true. And that's something that many of us, including our firm, are managing. We realize one of our employees is a mom who has a child of school age who's mostly home, because not all schools are even going back. So we made sure that we've given all the tools necessary to our employee to be able to handle her job pretty much the way it is now. Now, that being said, I have to say that we're very lucky at Feuer Klein because we're an insurance agency. We're not necessarily a retail point of contact of business. So, and many of us are able to continue working, lawyers, accountants, even doctors are doing some virtual. I don't know if any of you had a virtual meeting with your doctor, but sooner or later, you're going to need to show up. Right. So as you notice, people are taking people's temperatures. You can't walk into a doctor's office without temperature, without pre-registration, without discussion about whether or not you've been tested or whether or not you're having any symptoms. So this is the thing that we're going to have to do. Now, in my own personal opinion, if you don't mind me expressing it, Dale, I think the fact is right now, particularly in these uncertain times, we have to make sure that we use social distancing. We need to wear masks. This is serious. And, we saw what happened yesterday with our president and first lady, who, by the way, I'm sad that, politics aside, we don't want to see the president of the United States sick. Right. So, but the fact is that when you open yourself up to exposures and you're not careful, these kinds of things creep in. Thankfully, some of our sporting activities have been able to resume. No fans, but the fact is that they're creating these bubbles for the for the members of the teams so that they can conduct these. But even in spite of that, or despite that, we're still seeing outbreaks happen. We saw what happened on the Minnesota Vikings. They had to stop because they can't, this is a very insidious problem that we have.
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful. And here's one thing I want to mention. I'm in various groups, and we've had, and I asked the question, what if you don't bring your employees back to work? Is that a potential liability? And the answer that I got was no. The problem is when you bring your employees, and if you bring your employees back to work, how you handle that situation. If you're in a position to handle your business somewhat remotely, you're never going to have any liability because you ask somebody to stay home. That is going to be a very remote and rare occurrence. The areas where you're going to get into trouble is how you bring back employees, how you bring in business invitees, meaning customers, and what you do to make sure they stay safe. We know that going to restaurants, while they've limited in the state of New Jersey to 25%, we also know that without proper ventilation, that is double the exposure that you have from outside. Now, one of the things that businesses are doing, and I think this goes to your point, Dale, is you can put ultraviolet lighting in your HVAC system so that you're making sure that whatever air is coming into the environment is germ-free.
Right.
That's something that people are going to have to consider a lot more now, the various kinds of tools that we're going to be coming up with to make sure that our environments are safe.
Denny, let me go back to what you had early on. You had talked about looking within the contract with your landlord and others to share risks. I mean, does everyone need an attorney now when they're looking at their lease and so on, or can insurance agents give them some guidance and other things? What do you say to that?
Another great question, by the way. The fact is that in our particular business, we encourage our clients to let us take a look at their leases or any types of agreements that they're going to sign, because oftentimes there are hidden clauses related to insurance and risk management which need to be dealt with. Now, some of these are common things in a lease where you ask your tenant to name you as the landlord as an additional insured, or obviously you're the tenant and you need to name them. That's something that's been in leases a lot.
Right.
But it's very important that in any type of agreement that you have your financial business team, particularly, you have your accountant, you have your lawyer, you have your insurance agent. These are the people that you need to look to create proper language in the case of your attorney, to make sure that what you're about to sign, you've reviewed, whether it's your attorney or in our case, we do a lot of this for our clients, taking a look at agreements and trying to do things about that. Now, the idea, again, that I spoke about several minutes ago, you want to transfer risk away from yourself, and you try to not take on risk any more than you have to. But the idea of being in business and not taking risk on is a ridiculous notion, because you have to take risk. It's what you were talking about, Dale, before. Business is risk. We go out, we put our bread on the waters, we try to sell our product or provide services to our clients. You have to take risk in doing that. Even staying in bed all day long has an exposure, bed sores. So there's no way to avoid risk. Eventually, risk is going to find us. Fortuity is going to find us. As I said, shit happens.
Right. So as you are, as you've talked to people, you've worked with a lot of businesses, I know, of various sizes. Are there any patterns or anything that you're finding that some general guidance you can give to this audience?
Well,
that you've learned.
I think the general guidance that I've been giving all along is you need, particularly as you open up your business and operate, is to make sure that safety is the number one concern, whether it's for your employees or for your clients or customers. So that's something that there's a lot of people out there. You need to talk to your cleaning company, ask them what procedures they're doing to make sure that you're being disinfected, making sure that the surfaces are being disinfected. And of course, now the science is coming out, and we're all listening to that our big concern is the idea of the virus spreading through the air and through tiny little droplets. It's not just about touching, it's not just about surfaces, it's particularly about how we interact. So it's very important that we create social distancing. I know that there are now people who are spending a lot of time making sure that businesses are safe. For example, in schools, they're putting up plastic barriers between students, not only requiring them to wear masks. And also, frankly, the time of COVID has created opportunities for certain businesses to provide these products, whether it's PPP or PPE, excuse me, personal protective equipment, whatever it is. We're obviously going to need to find out, to invest time in that, make sure that we provide a safe environment. But let me also say that that gives us an opportunity to pat ourselves in the back and tout the fact that we are conducting a safe business. And that's something that can be an advantage over businesses that aren't doing that. So it's important to work with your business advisors, particularly your attorney and particularly your insurance agent or broker.
Well, so Danny, let's talk about some products. Because again, the audience, I don't know much about insurance. I don't even know what products are available. I don't know what liability insurance. I'd love for you to just talk about some of the products that are available to folks at any property and casualty.
Okay, let's talk about products, and I want to talk about that within a context. The fact is there are not a lot of products, if any products, related right now to COVID.
Right.
There's no pandemic coverage being offered by any insurance carriers. I'm not sure that that is going to be something that's going to be coming anytime soon. Nonetheless, let's take a moment and transfer our discussion away from simply COVID into the world of property and casualty insurance, which is where I think you're going, Dan.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want to talk about some of the major issues that are related to property and casualty insurance right now, because we have a market that's tightening up. Now, COVID is contributing to that to some degree, but it has nothing to do with that. Now, hopefully, most of you know that there are basic insurance products out there that you're purchasing. For example, to be in business, you need to have some type of liability insurance to cover you against negligence. Mm-hmm. Also, related to the products that you supply. So we call that products liability. And in the case of contractors, completed operations after they've done an installation. The fact is we have to have that. I mentioned employment practice liability, which is a very important product that's come onto the scene. We've seen what's happened now having nothing to do with COVID. And of course, if you bring your employees back and you're having improper bringing them back and they get sick, there's a question now that you're going to be getting suits for employment practice. So you need to have that coverage. But more importantly, there's all other kinds of reasons why you would have an employment practice exposure. As I mentioned before, negligence in hiring or firing, showing discrimination in any way. The other thing that we have.
Denny, so let me. I'm simple on insurance. So employment.
Go ahead.
Practice insurance. This is real. The basics. So employment practice. So I pay a policy. I guess it's like being board liability insurance. Just employment practice that it'll cover. What is it? Does it cover the legal costs, or what does it actually cover?
Well, liability insurance generally covers two areas: the cost to defend, mm-hmm. which is defense coverage. Okay. Whether it's a liability policy, a directors and officers policy, a professional liability policy, an employment practice liability policy, it's going to cover, if somebody sues you, it's going to cover your cost to defend. Okay. Over and above that, in the event that there's a judgment or there's a settlement, then you have to pay the judgment or settlement. So basically, liability policies cover for those two elements: legal costs and legal defense, and then judgment costs, or when you come to some kind of agreement through the courts and a settlement, they're going to pay that. Those are the two basic areas. Now, liability insurance is broken out into various different forms. For example, most of us know the general liability policy is going to cover for bodily injury or property damage. But what if there is no bodily injury or property damage? Well, that's where the world of errors and omissions insurance, directors and officers insurance, employment practice insurance basically covers for wrongful acts. Now, wrongful acts are different than bodily injury or property damage,
Right.
which is specifically excluded in most general liability policies.
Mhm.
So now what's happening is, and I'd like to comment, we're in the world of cyber right now. More and more businesses are conducting themselves online,
Right.
and that creates different types of exposures. Where before the typical retail exposure is you come in, you're shopping, you slip and fall, and you sue the store. That's people aren't coming into stores as much, but there are other exposures. That's why I was about to speak about cyber liability.
Right. Yeah.
And cyber liability has become a very important product right now because of the hacking, because of the need to notify. All these things are going on. And don't think for 1 minute that even with firewalls, of course, which you need, virus protection, which you need, all these various risk management techniques, which are usual and typical now to running a business, we've seen what's happening. Two elements are going on. You have some very smart hackers out there, and they keep getting smarter and better. I often say, I only wish they would get regular jobs. Look how much they could contribute to society. These people are so smart. But the fact is, they're doing what they're doing. So we have to be aware of that. But even more importantly, and I saw something like this happen yesterday, when you send an email, when you send a text, make sure you know who you're sending it to. Make sure that you be very careful about replying all. These are simple things that you can do. And of course, one of the biggest things that you can do in relationship to cyber exposures is make sure that your employees are trained to look at emails that are coming in. The fact is the old one that we had several years ago about somebody contacting you from some African nation telling you how they're going to give you $10 million, and you just, and they get away with it. Right. They used to come in as letters, then they became emails. Well, now we see so many emails that are phishing emails, spam emails, things that are trying to get you to open up the email so that they can then attack your account. We just saw a major religious institution had a $7.5 million theft, and it was from an employee's computer who was working from home. That's another thing you've got to be careful. If you're having employees work from home, you want to make sure that their computer has proper protections on it from viruses and other things. But very important is to do training. And one of the things that many companies now are doing is they're sending suspicious emails to their own employees, or they're having somebody do that to see if they'll open them. Because the fact is, all the software in the world is not going to stop these attacks. We saw what happened at the Democratic National Committee in the last election cycle, where Podesta's email, somebody opened up an email and then they got to everybody. Yeah. So this is something you have to be really careful about. So it's not. Go ahead.
Stop you there, because that's so, because I know a number of companies that have gotten the cyber the cyber holding them up, basically the cyber
gotten attacked.
Yeah. And so now is there insurance for that? If I have, and it was a bank, so if I have a company, can I buy insurance to protect me against that if my computer?
Well, one of the things you're talking about is now people are what they call it ransomware.
Yeah, we have ransomware.
They're holding you up. They're getting control of your computer.
Yeah.
The fact is that cyber insurance, electronic data processing insurance, various the products that we supply to our clients can help in this kind of situation. But what's really important is to make sure, again, risk management. Are you doing proper backup of your data? Right. Are you making sure it's kept somewhere, that backup? Some people back up stuff and leave it on top of the desk. Well, that's not a proper transfer of risk. Right. Again, you got to make sure that if you're going to do a transfer, you do a complete transfer and don't rely on that. If you're going to do a backup on your computer, are you putting it somewhere or keeping it in the cloud somewhere where you know it's going to be safe and you can retrieve it? That's why it's important in many cases to not just have a fireproof safe, but to have an EDP safe, an electronic data processing safe, or a vault where you keep your data stored, because they're generally lead lined. Because unbeknownst to many people, fires generate electromagnetic activity. And as you know, if you wave a magnet over a tape, it's going to erase it. So it's
Right.
very important to protect your data and make sure it's protected and properly backed up. I think that's kind of one of the things you're talking about, Dale.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we have a couple of questions. So, a couple people said that they're required to have business interruption insurance. And what's the cheapest way to show that you get the insurance to apply for an RFP? Is that if you apply for the RFP, you have to have business interruption insurance. Is there any guidance or advice that you have about getting it in a cost-effective way?
Well, that's an interesting question, by the way, and I'm looking at them now. When you're doing an RFP and you're required to show proof of insurance, when you say the cheapest way that you can get insurance if awarded the contract, well, of course, now we're talking about potential bonding requirements. I have clients that come to me and said we're looking at an opportunity, but they're requiring us to carry higher limits of liability than we have now. Well, we price it out for them. We show them what the cost is, and then they either buy it because they're going to get the contract, or they have to show the demonstration that they can get it. So then we have them write a letter, perhaps, as part of their negotiation process, that they've priced it out, and if they get the award, they will put that in place. Now, as you also know, when you're doing contracting of various kinds, there's bonding requirements.
Right.
So bonding requirements is really a quasi-insurance product. That's something that has to be underwritten on a financial basis, having to do with financial ability of you who is being bonded in the event of a loss, to make sure that's being covered, because bonding companies do not want to pay claims.
Right.
Bonding is the ability, having a bond, for example, a bid bond or a performance bond, is the ability to demonstrate to the entity that's giving you the work that in the event that something goes south, that the work is going to be completed, and the bonding company would then step in. But the bonding company wants to make sure there's not going to be a loss. So generally, people who don't have the proper financial wherewithal are going to have a very hard time getting bonded.
Right.
That's something that we're dealing with all the time.
So that's very, very important for small businesses and very important for small minority businesses who've had challenges. I know the African American Chamber, John Harmon, has done a lot of good work there. And so it's amazing how many, how few business people, Denny, as I said, really understand insurance, the basics of it.
And I don't think most people want to understand it either. The fact is, that's where you need a good agent or broker.
Yeah.
You need someone who can work with you, who you can develop trusting relationship, who's going to help take you through this process and hold your hand to make sure that they understand the nature of your business, that you work together with them to understand the exposures that you have, to understand the alternatives to handling those exposures, and then deciding on methods to institute those techniques and then constantly review them. Again, that's the risk management process. I do want to take up something, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
Dale,
of course, yeah.
which is some of the major problems that are occurring right now in property and casualty insurance.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that we have COVID, we have some other very significant issues that are going on right now. Let's start in the property insurance or property exposure side. You don't have to be a genius. All you have to do is turn on the nightly news to know that it is an incredible process going on with weather-related losses right now. And with the fact that we have climate change. Some people ascribe to the idea of global warming and the greenhouse effect. Other people don't. But I don't think there's anybody that doesn't realize that climate change is constantly going on. My own personal point of view is I do believe in the science. I do feel that we have had an production of carbon emissions in the world that have created a greenhouse effect and have stored, retained temperatures that normally escape from the planet. We know unequivocally that there is an increase in the temperature of water. It's a significant increase. It's led to all kinds of problems with hurricanes because hurricanes are fed by the heat of the water. That's why we're having larger and more intense hurricanes all the time and more frequent hurricanes because a tropical storm that starts picking up the warmth from the oceans are turning more and more into hurricanes. I think it was a week or so ago, we had 5 major hurricanes developing in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, hurricanes are happening all over the world all the time, but we're seeing an exacerbation. The other problem that we're having is because of the fact that our climate has changed and the environment and the atmosphere of the earth is heating up, we're seeing ice melt. We're seeing a rising of the waters.
Right.
So not only do we have the problem with more intense hurricanes, but we're also having the problem with storm surges. And
Right.
many of you have seen the effects. When we had Sandy, we had garages in New York City that were flooded out because, let's face it, New York was never equipped to deal with this kind of stuff. You're now seeing in New Orleans, and they built these huge walls to try to keep the water out. I mean, we're now having to do all kinds of techniques in relationship to that. But this is not our only problem right now. Take a look what's going on in California and in the West. We're having the worst air pollution anywhere, and these terrible fires, towns are being lost, people are losing their homes, these fires are running rampant, and we haven't even gotten into the worst part of the season yet. And a lot of this is happening because of drought. Now, one of the things that's an irony, on one hand, we're talking about all this water and hurricanes. On the other hand, we're talking about drought. And drought has led to much increased fires. This has been a long-term problem. You know, in California, where a lot of it is desert, they tried to bring in water, but it's just not overcoming it. And now what we're seeing, which is a really big issue, in areas in the Northwest, particularly the Northwest, which were much damper and you had much less forest fires, now they're drying out because of this problem that's going on with climate change.
Interesting.
Now we also have another problem, which is wind events. We're seeing tornado activity that's going on in the center of this country, which is unprecedented over the last few years. Many of you have seen news reports where you have a major tornado touch down and wipe out an entire town. I mean, these are catastrophic events, and that's why we call it cat insurance. And of course, many of you have seen the models that go on with the hurricanes where they say which way it's going to go, and they have 5 different models and they don't always agree.
Right.
But we do understand right now that we're having tremendous catastrophic exposure on top of the normal fires and everything else that happens. So what is happening is the price of property insurance is going up. And, you know, before we had a situation where insurance carriers were underwriting because they wanted to have cash flow that they could invest. But as of 2008, I think we all know interest rates have gone kaput. There's very few places to put your money. And we're seeing people scrambling to find ways of, you know, of counteracting that, particularly private equity.
Well,
that leads to another problem.
There's a question, a couple questions, but the one is, do you recommend self-insurance under any circumstances at all for anything? Is it, you know?
Well, the word self-insurance is kind of a misnomer because what you're actually saying is, do you recommend retaining exposures to loss? Well, that's a very complex question. The fact is that we all retain exposures to loss. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, the idea is to not retain exposures consciously. So what we had some products liability problems many years ago where carriers were not providing products liability, or it was so expensive, people had to retain their exposures and they were going there. Now, there's techniques that we utilize in risk management. If you decide to retain your exposure, one of the things that you can do is set up a self-insurance company where you're setting up your own insurance company. This is generally only going to be done by major carriers. Mm-hmm. There's also ways of doing that in a pooling way with self-insurance, and you can do that to some extent. Most of us in the kind of environment that we're here today in this particular setting are not going to be doing that kind of stuff. So the idea is, if you feel that you have to retain an exposure, it's important that you retain it consciously and you make efforts to make sure that if there's a loss, that you're prepared to deal with that. So one of the things that's a classic technique in risk management is, if you're going to retain an exposure, you need to set up reserves so that in the event, which is exactly what the insurance carrier does with your premiums, right, in the event that you have a problem, you have the money to pay for it. Most businesses, particularly small businesses, don't do that. That's why insurance is very important for small business, because the advanced techniques of risk management and utilizing your, self-funding of exposures is something that's generally only going to be utilized by very large organizations.
Well, Denny, we're coming close to time, but there's one question, because you're so knowledgeable about this risk management industry. A friend of mine used to work for Swiss Re, a reinsurance company. Can you explain what a reinsurance company is related to an insurance company? Just real quick, what, for those, like me who don't know?
I'm trying to look at some of these questions as well. Reinsurance is very simple. Reinsurance is the insurance that insurance companies buy because they're laying off their exposures because they don't want to take on all the risks themselves.
Right.
That is a major discussion which we could have, but I think it's better to deal with the simplistic element. There's two other things that I want to talk about. As I was saying, the major problems right now. Private equity is looking for places to put their money. They're finding it very hard. One of the things that they're doing right now is they're doing something called litigation financing. Litigation financing is where a private equity firm will buy out a litigant's rights for pennies or on the dollar, cents on the dollar, and then they go after the insurance carriers with deep pockets for higher settlements. This is contributing to a big crisis in liability insurance right now. The other thing that's going on in relationship to that is social inflation. The fact is juries are giving higher awards all the time. So not only are we seeing increases in property insurance due to catastrophic exposures, many of which there's nothing that we can do about in terms of the day-to-day moments. Obviously, people feel that there are still some things that can be done. But Al Gore recently said some of this problem in terms of the increase in water in the oceans, it's done. It's not going to reverse itself so fast. The Antarctica is melting, ice melt is a terrible thing. But in the fact of litigation financing, where you have these private equity firms, I believe it's a predatory practice, and I think the government should step in and set up guidelines. We saw this problem before that led to serious problems back in 2008 when insurance carriers were doing all these credit default swaps and things, and they weren't backing it up. It was a quasi-insurance product without any reserves. So what I'm saying is that on top of all the other problems that we're dealing with, right now we're dealing with a hardened market that is a result of the fact that we're having catastrophic losses, that liability claims are going up. And so the fact is you need to have insurance. It's important that you're working with a good broker, someone that you have a trusting relationship, someone who's going to be part of your business advisory team, and someone's going to be able to reach out to you and work with you to handle all of this type of stuff. And it's an ongoing discussion, and it's a very complex discussion. Right. And it takes a lot of time and effort over a number of years to put your business in a place where basically what you can do is replace an unknown with a known. The idea of insurance is that you have a known premium that replaces an unknown what could happen. But it does come down to one final thought. I call it Farmer Jones and Farmer Brown. Societies, civilizations, people have always watched each other's back. Going back in the Amish, we know that the two farmers agree, or the group of farmers, that if your barn burns down, we're going to help you. We're going to be there. We're going to rebuild your barn. Well, what if that's happening during harvest season and you can't leave your harvesting machines? Well, that's where Mr. Smith came in and said, hey, if you give me a premium and you all give me a premium, I'll rebuild your barn. So insurance is really a simple product. It goes all the way back to the Phoenician traders centuries and centuries ago, who used to take their ships, and when they go on a commercial voyage, they would spread the risk of the various goods so that let's say if you have 100% in 5 ships, 20% of your product would be on each of those ships. So in the event that any one of them went down, you didn't lose everything. Right. So this idea of risk sharing, of risk control, of taking on exposures is something that we've always done. It's a natural behavior.
Well, Denny, we're right at 1 o'clock, and I just want to thank you. You're so knowledgeable about this area.
So I'm always happy to help people. Anybody needs to get in touch with me. I'm
So
happy to help
what's the
you.
phone number? What's your website and phone number? Please give that out.
Well, our website is rfkinsurance.com. That's Richard Frank Kite, rfkinsurance.com. Our phone number is 973-364-9733. And my email address is denny.klein@rfkinsurance.com. There's one other question I want to make sure that I've answered.
Well, yeah, well, there was one about family businesses and diversity, which
I related to Denny feeling good about inviting fourth generation into business.
right.
How do you approach Black Lives Matter and diversity issues when one of the main purposes of the business is to keep your family wealthy and well supported?
And my answer to that is diverse employees, but really entrepreneurial businesses, so that you know, you don't want to make it necessarily a business with someone outside of the family, but we need to support all small businesses. So with that, Denny, we have to go. So just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity today.
And take care, everyone. We'll see you next Friday.